My name is Thalia Duval, 32 years old from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. The call came out of nowhere. My estranged father was dead, and I was his sole heir. But stepping back into the Duval estate in Baton Rouge wasn't just about inheritance, it was a trap. And my stepbrother Roman? He wasn't just waiting. He was ready to erase me again. What he didn't know was this time, I came prepared, with a plan to burn everything he built to the ground. Like and subscribe to hear more shocking stories of betrayal and revenge. You won't want to miss what happens next. Welcome back to the story. I hadn't heard the name Duval spoken out loud in years, not since I moved to Nashville and built a life where no one knew who I was or what I'd left behind in Baton Rouge. So when the call came through and the voice on the other end said, "Miss Thalia Duval?" I nearly hung up. "Yes," I said cautiously. "This is Grant Beauregard, an attorney with the firm of Leclerc Moreau. I'm calling regarding the estate of your late father, Charles Duval." The words hit like a cold slap. I sat down hard on the edge of my bed. "He's dead?" "Passed away 2 weeks ago," the lawyer said gently. "I'm sorry." I understand there was distance. Distance? That was a polite way to describe what had happened. He hadn't spoken to me in over a decade, not since the night I told him his golden boy Roman had stolen my college fund. He called me ungrateful. A liar. Said I was trying to tear the family apart. Then he told me to get out. I did. And I never looked back. "I'm not sure why you're calling me," I said stiffly. "You were named sole heir," he replied. "The house, the land in Point Capee, and what's left of Duval Timber Supply. It's all in your name." I was stunned. He never even called when I graduated. Or when I won that grant in grad school. Now he wanted me to inherit everything. "This must be a mistake," I murmured. "There's no mistake," he said. "He made the changes a year ago. He wanted you to have it." Something inside me twisted. Guilt? Doubt? Rage? I couldn't tell. What I did know was that if Charles Duval left me anything, it wasn't out of love. It was a move. A piece on a board I hadn't touched in years. "I'll fly down tomorrow," I said. "Good," he replied. "Roman's expecting you." And just like that, the old wound reopened. Roman Duval, my charming, lying stepbrother. The reason I left home. The reason my father turned on me. The one who'd smiled as I packed my bags and walked out the door at 19. I hung up the phone and sat in silence. Baton Rouge. That house. That family. I'd buried it all. Now it was clawing its way back to the surface. I looked at my reflection in the window, older, stronger, but still carrying the weight of what they did to me. I didn't want their estate. I didn't want their money. But I needed to know why. Why now? Why me? If they were opening a door they thought I wouldn't walk through, they were wrong, because I was coming back. Not to forgive. Not to forget, to finish what they started. The Baton Rouge air was thick with heat and memory when I stepped out of the cab in front of the Duval estate. The wrought iron gates were still the same, twisting, elegant, and unforgiving. Spanish moss hung like a warning over the gravel drive, and for a second, I hesitated. This house had never been home to me. It was Roman's kingdom, and there he was, leaning casually against the column by the front door, drink in hand, wearing a smirk I hadn't missed at all. "Thalia," Roman called, his southern drawl smoother than bourbon. "Well, I'll be damned. You actually came." I kept my shoulders squared. "Don't get used to it." He laughed like we were old friends sharing an inside joke. "Still sharp. You always had bite." I walked past him without a word, letting the heavy door creak open into the past I had worked so hard to escape. The house smelled of polished wood and lemon oil, the way it always had. But underneath that was something newer, sterile, quiet. Like someone had erased the soul from the place. "Dad wanted everything spotless before the will went through," Roman said behind me. He was a proud man to the end. I turned to face him. He was also a man who didn't return a single call or letter in 13 years. Roman shrugged. He was stubborn. You know that. I knew exactly what he was. I also knew Roman had been the one whispering in his ear, turning him against me, manipulating every conversation to protect himself. He gestured toward the sitting room. Drink? I'm good. He poured one anyway. You're probably wondering why he left it all to you. That's the understatement of the year. Roman chuckled, his eyes glinting with something darker beneath the charm. Truth is, Dad had a change of heart. Guilt, maybe. Or maybe he just realized who actually had a head for business. You've done well for yourself. Haven't you? I didn't answer. He handed me a glass I didn't touch. I always said you had fire. You were just misdirected. You mean when you stole my college fund? His smile froze, just for a second, but it was enough. I invested it, he said, too quickly. Tried to grow it for both of us. It didn't work out. I've apologized. No, Roman, I said coldly. You never apologized. You lied. And he believed you. We stared at each other. The air between us thickened. Then he smiled again, too smooth, too rehearsed. Well, bygones, right? We're here now. Let's figure this out like family. A familiar chill ran down my spine. Roman always smiled like that, right before twisting the knife. I didn't know his game yet, but I could feel it. And this time, I wasn't the same scared girl packing a bag in the middle of the night. This time, I came prepared to play. The study hadn't changed. Dark paneled walls, leather-bound books, and the smell of old pipe smoke that still lingered like a ghost. My father's old desk sat in the corner, scarred by decades of use, and above it hung the same faded portrait of his father, staring down with judgment in oil and canvas. I waited until Roman left for his meeting with investors to explore it alone. The desk drawers were locked, but I remembered where he kept the key. Under the floorboard near the fireplace. I pried it up with a fireplace poker and sure enough, there it was, tucked beside a rusted tin of cigarillos he hadn't touched in years. The drawers opened with a groan. At first, I found only routine paperwork, old contracts from Duval Timber, letters from city officials, even some old maps of Point Capi. But then I spotted something odd, a single file folder tucked beneath the drawer's lining. I pulled it out, careful not to rip the brittle paper. Inside were two things, a notarized deed for the land in Point Capi. And a second copy, nearly identical, except this one was signed in shaky handwriting and backdated by almost 8 months. And the signature, mine. I hadn't been in Louisiana in years. My pulse quickened. I flipped to the next page, confirmation of transfer, notarized with a name I didn't recognize, Marla Donnell. I snapped a photo with my phone and dug deeper. Taped to the inside of the folder was a sticky note in my father's handwriting. Roman wants the land. Told him no. Something's not right. The words hit me like a slap, so my father had known something was wrong. He may not have made things right while he was alive, but maybe he'd started to see through Roman's mask. There was more. Behind the folder, inside a false panel in the back of the drawer, I found a slim black ledger marked in red ink. A record of deposits, transfers to an offshore account over the course of 3 years. The amount started small. Then ballooned. The last transfer? Just 6 weeks before my father died, all signed by R. Duval. I stared at the figures, the dates, the scribbled notes in the margins. Roman had been siphoning money from the business for years. And now, he was trying to steal the land through a forged deed, with my name on it. I sat back, heart pounding, the old study suddenly feeling colder, darker. Roman wasn't just manipulative. He was dangerous. He hadn't invited me here to honor our father's wishes. He wanted me here to silence me. To push through a fraudulent deal and walk away with the last of the family fortune. But he didn't count on me finding this. He didn't count on me remembering how to fight, and he sure as hell didn't count on me still carrying the fire he lit all those years ago. Roman made dinner reservations at Maison Le Bleu, the kind of place where you order wine by the vintage and pretend your family isn't built on lies. I almost declined, but something told me this was more than just a dinner, it was a performance. And I wanted front row seats. He greeted me outside the restaurant with a grin, extending his arm like we were royalty returning from exile. You clean up well, he said, lips curled in that same smug smile. ready to talk business? I'm ready to listen, I replied, slipping past him into the candlelit room. Dinner started with small talk. He asked about Nashville, my work in corporate research, how I'd stayed off the radar all these years. I answered just enough to keep him talking, watching his face for tells. Roman had always been good at the long con. He could charm a banker out of their own vault. Halfway through the second course, he pulled out a leather folder and laid it carefully between us. I thought we could simplify things, he said. Dad wanted you to have the house. I'll take the land in Point Capi. It's a fair split, Thalia. Clean. No lawyers. No noise. I opened the folder. There it was, the same forged deed I'd found in the study. My signature in neat, flowing ink. Too neat. Too perfect. The notary's name matched the one from before. Marla Donnell, you already filed this, didn't you? I asked quietly, his jaw twitched. It's not filed yet. Just prepared. I was trying to save us both the headache. By forging my name? He laughed softly, like I'd made a cute joke. Don't be dramatic. It's business. Sometimes you have to grease the wheels. I met his gaze, steady and cold. So grease them with your own name. Not mine. He leaned in, voice low and silky. Look, the land's already been promised. Investors are lined up. If you push back, you'll delay everything, ruin the value. I'm offering you the house, free and clear. That's worth something. I swirled the wine in my glass, watching the liquid spin. You're right, I said slowly. The house is worth something. Roman's smile returned, smug and victorious, but not as much as the truth. His face froze. I reached into my bag and pulled out a copy of the ledger, the photos of the forged documents, and a list of questionable wire transfers I'd uncovered in the last 24 hours. I slid them across the table, one by one. Roman stared at them, the blood draining from his face. You came here to scam me, I said. But I came to bury you. The silence between us sharpened like broken glass. He stood abruptly, voice low and furious. You don't know what you're starting. I stood too. No, Roman. You started it years ago. I'm just finishing it. I left the restaurant without touching dessert. Sweeter things were coming. The story needed light. Roman thrived in shadows, whispers behind boardroom doors, forged signatures hidden in backdated files. But I knew if I pulled the curtain back far enough, someone would listen. And burn it all down. That someone was Kyra St. James. We'd met at Tulane, back when she was still chasing stories about student protests and crooked deans. Now she ran a hard-hitting investigative column for the Baton Rouge Ledger. When I called her and said, I've got a family scandal that involves forgery, fraud, and a stolen inheritance, she responded with 3 words, send everything. Now. I forwarded the documents I'd copied from my father's study, the forged deed, the financial ledger, even the fake notary records. Within hours, she texted, you weren't kidding. This could shake loose some very old money. We met at her office the next morning. Her wall was a collage of headlines and color-coded timelines. She moved with the intensity of someone who lived off the truth and bled for every comma. He's not just skimming off the family business, she said, tapping her pen against a photo of Roman from a recent gala. He's laundering money through shell companies. He's rerouting contracts to firms he owns. And if these offshore accounts are real, it's a federal offense. I exhaled. You can run it? Kyra looked me dead in the eye. We're not just going to run it. We're going to torch the whole tree. The article went live 3 days later. Duval legacy under fire, inheritance fraud and financial crimes alleged. It was everywhere by noon. News vans parked outside the Duval estate. Reporters camped on Roman's front lawn. Former business partners began pulling out of deals. Whispers turned into roars. I watched it unfold from the window of a downtown cafe, phone buzzing nonstop. Roman tried calling twice. I didn't answer. By sunset, state regulators had announced an inquiry into Duval timber supply. The Baton Rouge business elite began distancing themselves with statements of shock and disappointment. Kyra texted me a link to a morning segment, Roman being asked, on camera, about the fake deed. He smiled, smooth as ever, but the cracks were visible. "This is clearly a misunderstanding," he said. "We'll handle it through the proper channels." But behind the rehearsed grin was panic. That night, I drove by the estate. It was quiet. No light in the study. No familiar figure sipping whiskey in the window. Just Roman's silhouette pacing the driveway alone, barking into a phone. I didn't stop. This wasn't about watching him fall. Not anymore. It was about reclaiming what he tried to steal, not just land or money, but my voice. He used lies to build his empire. I'd used the truth to start its collapse. And I wasn't finished yet. By the end of the week, the Duval name was no longer synonymous with prestige. It was plastered across every headline in Baton Rouge. Drenched in disgrace, Duval Timber Supply under state investigation. Whistleblower claims point to years of fraud. The fall of Roman Duval. From Southern royalty to scandals center, Roman tried to stay ahead of the blaze. He held press conferences in tailored suits, blinking too slowly, speaking too fast, flanked by his lawyer like a mobster in denial. But no amount of polish could undo what Kyra's reporting had started. The article had ignited something deeper than scandal. It cracked open a rotten shell no one had dared examine. Now every contractor Roman ever shortchanged, every employee he ever silenced, every partner he ever burned was crawling out of the woodwork, ready to testify. It was a wildfire, and I had the matchbook. Roman's primary investor, a Houston-based real estate mogul, pulled out on Monday. The next day, 2 of the company's top accounts froze their contracts. And by Friday, the Louisiana Secretary of State's office announced an official audit of all Duval holdings, dating back 10 years. Inside sources told Kyra that investigators were especially interested in a series of land transfers, especially one that bore a very familiar forged signature, mine. Meanwhile, the employees at Duval Timber began talking anonymously to the press. Reports of misallocated pension funds, missing payrolls, and bribes disguised as consulting fees surfaced like oil slicks after a shipwreck. The company was hemorrhaging, and Roman was unraveling with it. I received a single text from him that week. "Roman, you think this makes you strong? You're just like him." I stared at it for a long time. Did he mean my father? The man who finally saw through him too late, or did he mean himself? Either way, I didn't reply. Let silence be the last word. I spent the rest of that week going through old records at the courthouse and the firm. Every scrap of paper with a signature, every suspicious amendment, every last memo signed by Roman or someone claiming to be me, I handed it all to Kyra. And she handed it straight to the state. Each new headline scorched the earth he once ruled. Neighbors stopped waving at the estate. Clients ghosted his calls. Even the socialites who used to giggle at his jokes now crossed the street when they saw him downtown. And for the first time, the mighty Duval name, once engraved into plaques and etched into legacy, was crumbling like ash in a storm. But I didn't come for revenge alone. I came for the truth, for everything they took from me, buried in paper and pride. And now that the house of cards was burning, I had no intention of saving anyone trapped inside, especially not Roman. It happened faster than I expected, but not before Roman tried one last move. A week into the investigation, Kyra sent me a file marked confidential, essay with Tilda Paulo routing. Inside were transfer records from a Brazilian bank account tied to a shell company called Lucinia Group Limited, registered under a pseudonym, of course, Richard Gallier. Roman's middle name. Gallier had been receiving consulting payments from Duval Timber for 4 years. It was the final nail. "I've sent it to the feds," Kyra said over the phone, her voice tight. "This isn't just fraud. This is international money laundering." I thanked her and hung up, staring at the printed account summary. The amount, $4.3 million, hidden overseas, funneled in quiet streams to keep it under the radar. But Roman forgot one thing. He taught me how to play dirty. The next morning, I sent an anonymous tip to the Louisiana Financial Crimes Task Force, then called Grant Beauregard, my father's estate attorney, and told him to freeze every Duval account until the matter was resolved. Grant hesitated. "Thalia, this could escalate things." "It already has," I interrupted. "Do it." By evening, Roman was cornered. The arrest happened at the Baton Rouge Metro Airport. I wasn't there, but Kyra's photographer was. Roman was halfway to the international departures gate with a first-class ticket to Lisbon when a trio of plainclothes officers intercepted him. He wore dark sunglasses and a baseball cap like some bad disguise could erase the headlines already circling him like vultures. The next day, the front page of the Ledger exploded. Duval heir arrested at airport, attempted flight from ongoing fraud investigation. I sat in a diner on Florida Boulevard, quietly sipping my coffee as the server flipped through the paper next to me. Roman's mugshot stared up from the table, his charm finally stripped away, his eyes wild with disbelief. The server shook her head and muttered, "Damn. Thought he was untouchable." I smiled into my cup. No one is. Later that night, I walked up to the gates of the estate. The once pristine hedges were untrimmed. The lanterns lining the walkway flickered with dying bulbs. No one answered the door. Just past the gate, I spotted a suitcase tossed near the porch. Roman's, likely dropped in his last desperate attempt to disappear. Checkmate. He had tried to steal everything from me, my inheritance, my name, even my voice. But now he was behind bars, and every piece of the empire he built on lies was being dismantled brick by brick, and I wasn't done yet. There were still accounts to audit, still names to clear, and still truths left to shine light on. But tonight, I stood at those gates not as the girl he once exiled, but as the woman who returned and burned down his throne, and this time, he wasn't walking away. The Duval estate stood quiet when I returned, emptier than it had ever felt, stripped of Roman's presence, stripped of my father's silence. Just a crumbling symbol of legacy and lies. I stood on the porch with the key in my palm, the same brass key that once locked me out. Now it opened everything. But I didn't want it anymore. The house wasn't home. It never had been. It was a museum of manipulation, rooms where gaslighting lived in the wallpaper and betrayal slept under every bed. And as I walked the hallways one last time, I didn't feel grief, I felt freedom. In the study, I opened the desk drawers one final time. No ledgers. No secrets left to uncover. Just dust and echoes. My father's portrait still hung crooked above the fireplace. I didn't straighten it. Instead, I called the real estate attorney that afternoon. "I want it sold," I said. "All of it. Even the house?" he asked, "especially the house." We closed the deal in a matter of weeks. A local preservation nonprofit purchased the property with plans to turn it into a cultural heritage center for public education, something rooted in truth, not a name. I included a provision in the contract. The Duval name was never to appear on the signage, brochures, or legal ownership. Not one plaque would mention us. Not even a whisper. I donated the adjoining land to the state, including the acreage in Point Capi, the land Roman tried to steal with my forged signature. It would be converted into a wildlife preserve, untouched and unclaimed. Let it all return to the earth. Let our name rot quietly with it. At the small press event announcing the sale, a reporter asked, "Ms. Duval, do you think this helps restore the family legacy?" I looked her dead in the eye. "I'm not restoring it. I'm erasing it." She blinked. "Why?" "Because some names don't deserve to be remembered." She didn't have a response, but I didn't need one. The flash of cameras caught the moment, but none of them would ever capture the years I spent clawing back what was mine. Or the girl who once left this house with a single duffel bag and a cracked voice. I stood there a long time after the crowd left, alone at the edge of the garden, that night. I didn't cry, I didn't curse, I just lit one match and dropped it into a tin trash barrel behind the house. Inside it, the last remaining deed, the original blueprints, a Duval-branded cigar box, and a family crest I used to trace with my finger as a child. The flame hissed, danced, and devoured. By morning, it was ash, and I was something new. New Orleans was louder than I remembered. Music spilled from French Quarter balconies. Laughter echoed off cobblestone streets, and streetcars clattered along St. Charles like the city had its own heartbeat. I'd found a small apartment above a used bookstore near the Garden District. Quiet. Anonymous. Mine. Some nights I'd sit on the balcony, sipping chicory coffee, listening to the life below. But inside, I lived in a different rhythm. A slower, colder one. The rhythm of someone who had walked through fire and come out scorched, but standing. Roman had his day in court. Fraud, forgery, attempted evasion of federal charges. He looked thinner in the courtroom, the tailored suits gone, replaced by the standard gray of men who thought they were untouchable until the cuffs clicked. I didn't attend the sentencing. I read the verdict in the Times-Picayune over breakfast: 18 years, no parole, no early release, and no more empire. That was the cold truth of justice. It didn't come with satisfaction, not really. It wasn't a movie climax. No dramatic music, no thunderclap. Just paperwork, steel bars, and silence. But sometimes, silence is all the peace you need. A letter arrived a few weeks later. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting. Romans. Inside was a single sentence, scrawled like it had been clawed into the page: "You never deserved the name." I stared at the words for a long time before lighting a match and watching the paper curl to black in my kitchen sink. He was wrong, of course. I didn't deserve the name. I survived it. The Duval name was gone now, erased from the estate, from the company, from the land that once bore our blood. What was left of it lived only in court documents and cautionary tales, and I was just Thalia now. I started freelance consulting work under a new LLC, no family name attached, no legacy to live under. Just me. Building something from the wreckage, not to prove anyone wrong, but to prove myself right. Every now and then, I'd hear from Kyra. Her story on the Duval scandal had won her an award. She offered to send me a framed copy of the article. I politely declined. I didn't need to see Roman's face ever again. Revenge didn't consume me like people always warn you it will. It didn't poison my heart. It clarified it. Sharpened it. Showed me who I was when everything else had been stripped away. Roman turned my life upside down, and I left him with nothing but his own reflection, rotting in a cell, counting the days and blaming the wrong person. Justice isn't always warm. Sometimes it's ice. Cold. Clean. Final, but it's justice all the same, and in that cold truth, I found peace. If this story gave you chills, don't leave without hitting that like button. It helps the story reach more people who love twists and real justice. Subscribe for more true revenge tales, and drop a comment. What would you have done if you were Thalia? Remember, sometimes silence is the loudest revenge.